Hi, I'm Ann Sullivan, WIPP's Chief Advocate, and today I'm leading a discussion with Bev Jones of Clearways Consulting. Bev Jones is a friend of mine from way back in early 2000s when she was the Vice President of External Affairs for Consolidated Natural Gas Company. And from that, she was a leader, an early leader actually, at the time for promotion of women, women who were working in Washington, D.C., and was a real leader in her role there. And then she went on to be a consultant and work with leaders to bring new productivity to their teams. And today she helps professionals enhance their performance, address career challenges and transitions, and continue to grow. Since 2002, she's flourished as an executive coach and consultant, assisting individuals and organizations as well to become more effective. She wrote and speaks about many issues related to leadership, communication, collaboration, innovation, productivity, and strategy. And Bev is the author of a recent book from Career Press, Think Like an Entrepreneur, Act Like a CEO, 50 Indispensable Tips to Help You Stay Afloat, Bounce Back, and Get Ahead at Work. And for that reason, I thought we could all benefit from hearing Bev's thoughts on, being an entrepreneur, acting like a CEO, and maybe very applicably right now, helping us stay afloat, bounce back, and get to work as the year ends and a new one is about to begin. So, Bev, welcome.
Thank you so much, and I'm so pleased to have a chance to chat with you.
So I thought I would just ask you, what inspired you to write this book?
Well, I wrote it gradually over a long period of time. As you mentioned, I've been working with helping people to grow professionally since more years than you want to know about. But I started in university as a university affirmative action leader before law school, before my Washington days. And so it's been a theme throughout my career. And when I had a chance to retire early, I thought, that's what I want to do. I want to work with helping people move ahead, and particularly women. And I'm sitting in my office here, and I have still stacks and stacks of actual real paper books in addition to my Kindle. But, not many of them are quick and simple for the kind of people that you and I know who are busy and have to do things fast. So along the way, I started trying to summarize things really tightly. And I did it the way you and I would back in the day when we had a complicated issue when we were going to take it to the Hill and we wanted to get it down to one page. So I started writing like one-pagers for my clients on some of the big themes that I saw coming out in leadership or studies of special issues for women. And I turned it into a newsletter and a blog. And finally, I heard from my clients and others who were tired of all this paper. Why don't you just put it in a book? So I put some of 50 of the themes together and did a proposal, and Career Press liked it, and that's how I wrote the book. And it's really a distillation of things that a lot of people kind of already know, but it's helpful even if you're pretty advanced to remind yourself. And to tell you the truth, I was just reminding myself from a chapter on an issue that I came across yesterday. They're reminders for some people.
So with all of those tips in your head and now on paper, I thought maybe you'd want the audience, by the way, that you're talking to is mostly women entrepreneurs and employers. Mm-hmm. So I thought I'd start with, give us some of your favorite tips that you discuss if in the role of an entrepreneur. As you mentioned, we're all busy, and you're an entrepreneur as well. We're all busy, and we don't have a whole lot of time, and yet we're expected to lead companies and make good decisions. And so do you want to start out with some of your favorite tips from that angle?
Yeah. Let me mention a few of them. One of them is, and this is the one I was just thinking about the other day with respect to a client. I think that entrepreneurs sometimes suffer from what I think of as big project letdown. And it's the same with leaders of any size group, but particularly when you're out there kind of alone without a big infrastructure system, what tends to happen is that when you are working on maybe a new product launch or a big conference or um, um, anything that's important in your career, you tend to put everything on it. And then after the event happens or the launch happens or whatever it is, it's not unusual to feel a real sense of depression and loss of energy and feeling like, gosh, I worked so hard. Was this good enough? One of the things that the research suggests is that when you really work on a crisis or something that's stimulating, is it changes your whole body chemistry. You feel um, a big surge of sort of adrenaline and cortisol and other kind of things that keep you going. And when it ends, your body chemistry literally changes. And so it's not surprising that you're kind of low energy and depressed. But it's also partly because of how we tend to let things go. When we have a big project, it's so easy if you don't have a huge amount of infrastructure that kind of goes along without you. We tend to um, say, I'll get to that boring thing when this is over, or I'll schedule myself heavily immediately after. And so one of the ways you deal with big project letdown is being realistic about the deadlines you give yourself afterwards, and being realistic about the expectations you let other people um, expect from you. Another part of dealing with big project letdown that I've seen effective with people is learning how to give yourself and all the people around you permission to celebrate. After the initial exhaustion from whatever the crisis is, you want to do a little debrief and figure out how you can do it better. But I think that celebrating and almost establishing a ritual of celebration is a terrific thing for entrepreneurs to do, whether it's just you or you have a cast of thousands. Pausing and acknowledging the achievement and acknowledging what went well and kind of focusing on the positive in the environment is a terrific way to offset kind of the blues and the down period that happens after a big project. So that's a theme that I see a lot in all kinds of situations, is learning how to shift to a positive framing, and that seems to be something that a lot of entrepreneurs are good at. That's how they got to be successful entrepreneurs. But it it's something that most of us always have to keep working on. Not many people are just sort of born optimists, and the rest of us can choose to keep finding ways to make the choice and get us through the tough times when it feels like the threats are overwhelming. You know, that positive framing inside our own heads can be tremendously important. Do those things make sense?
Well, I got the celebration part, and you're so right. When you're done with that big project, you're off to the next thing, right? You barely
Mhm.
have time, I think, to celebrate at all because you're busy doing
Yes,
the next thing.
that's
And
right. And
so,
the
that's a
next
good
thing is
thing.
probably late. Yeah. And
Exactly.
if
Exactly.
you're so it's almost like you're when you should be taking your victory lap, you're cleaning up the mess that you hadn't gotten to. And if you do that time after time, you kind of get worn down, and the people
Right.
around you get worn down, and it stops being fun. So pausing to celebrate as you go along and being really conscious of it is a terrific thing if you're leading a team, and it becomes, I think, even more important if you don't have a big team. you've got to build a sense of balance in how you schedule things.
And not
I think that
exhaust everybody
managing,
around you, right?
yeah, that's right. And managing yourself, managing what I think of as managing the voice in your head is something that is a good way to it's a good way to enhance your ability as a leader, because if you can step back and listen to your own dialogue, if you can step back and hear the negative things that you're saying to yourself or your laments, if you develop that discipline of listening to yourself and reframing it, it's like you're always in practice for the ways you're interacting with other people, whether they're your customers or your staff. It's a discipline that I think we can work on all our lives. But you see, kind of the people who become calmer and stronger as they go along. From the outside, and as a coach, I have the luxury sometimes of having conversations that help me get closer to hearing what they're saying on the inside. And I know a lot of people who tweak their practice of managing their inner voice. I often see them have not only a growth spurt in their career, but reach a sort of a new level of ease and enjoyment of what you're doing, of what they're doing.
I thought it was right. I thought it was interesting that you named your book "Think Like an Entrepreneur and Act Like a CEO." Like, why isn't it called "Act Like an Entrepreneur and Think Like a CEO"? I mean, what are the differences what is the distinction that you're drawing between acting like an entrepreneur and thinking like a CEO?
That's a good question, and I think that they sometimes merge, but in my mind there is a difference. Let's talk first about acting like a CEO, and then we'll get back to the entrepreneur. When you are working with interns, say, or people just starting out, aren't there situations where you kind of just notice there's this one intern at the very beginning of their career, and yet you just know they're going to be successful, they're going to be leaders, and they are not leading people, they're just starting, but what they're doing, the way you act like a CEO, even if you don't know what you're doing, is you look around, and if there's something that you can impact, you take responsibility for it. So if it's a coffee spill, if it's as simple as running out to make copies when you notice somebody needs them in a hurry, no matter how early you are in your career, and even if you are uncertain about your path and you're new in the field, by taking responsibility for the things that you can do, including being positive in your interactions and being supportive of other people and looking to see who needs help, that's how you act like a leader. That's how you act like a CEO. That's the starting point wherever you are in your career. And I think that thinking like an entrepreneur, in a way, is a little bit more complicated. It used to be in careers in, say, the government or big organizations or things like that. You had the idea that you just kind of climb on the ladder and you do what you're told and you'd make progress and there was security. Well, that is entirely gone. There's still a few places like that, but I'll tell you, I'm in Washington. I work with a lot of people pretty close to the top, and there's just that kind of security, if it was ever real, is an illusion. What you do when you're thinking like an entrepreneur is to constantly ask, who's the customer? The customer may be your boss if you're in an organization. The customer may be a potential customer. You're constantly thinking about, who am I trying to please and what do they need, so that you can meet their need. You're always looking around to try to see the big picture. That's what entrepreneurs do. They don't think about this little widget they're making today. They think about the whole widget market and the environment in which the widget market is developed. You look at the big picture. That's part of thinking like an entrepreneur. You going back to the idea of being positive, you don't sit around and lament when things don't go right. You tell yourself this is a learning experience, and you get up and you keep moving. So there are kind of thought patterns and attitude choices that entrepreneurs make that help them really create things. And what I see is those are that kind of thinking, that sort of taking responsibility and making a choice to keep going positive, going forward in a positive way. That's what thinking like an entrepreneur is all about. But however you're thinking, if you see somebody who needs a little help, if you see a way you can add value, you act like a CEO by always taking responsibility for doing your bit for whatever is happening at the moment.
So it's possible to think like an entrepreneur, but not act like a CEO. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think that the person who has a pretty good grasp of what needs to be done and maybe is got a smart idea, but isn't isn't trustworthy, isn't trying to make a contribution to the general good, isn't mentoring other people, isn't doing the things that leaders do. Um, it's not enough to have the right ideas in your head. I think both the for me, acting like a CEO is acting with character and taking responsibility for um, doing your share and taking care of people around you, while thinking like an entrepreneur is being creative and asking questions and trying to figure out what the customer wants. And those two together, acting with character, taking care of other people, but not taking anything for granted and thinking creatively, that's what makes people successful in their career. And you know what it's like in Washington. We've both been around the town for a long time, and you see people kind of out in public life, and sometimes there's a big fall. They lose an election, or they get the party changes and they lose their job, or maybe there's some kind of scandal. But some people you just know are going to come back, and you see the same people rise again and again and again. And what I was trying to get at was thinking about what is it that makes it so that some people always come back, and old timers like us can actually predict, what are the things that we're maybe unconsciously noticing about them. And I think it's that it's how they're thinking, but also how they're behaving with character.
Well, character sometimes is in short supply, right?
Yes, yes.
It seems like it's in short supply sometimes, so I get it.
I fear that it is.
I was looking at the titles of your chapters, and I wondered if we could talk a little bit about them. It kind of builds on your last theme about having character. One of the chapters is how to build great teams even if you're not the leader. So tell me what you've learned there. Mm-hmm. That's really interesting to me because entrepreneurs and women entrepreneurs, even if they're not entrepreneurs, I think women are very interested in how to build great teams, spend an awful lot of time trying to figure it out. So give us your tips.
Well, one thing is that a lot of projects are done by teams, and in some cases it's not even clear who the leader is, or maybe if there is a leader, it's a nominal leadership. In organizations, there might be self-directed teams, but if a lot of great work is done through collaboration. So I think that the first thing in learning to manage a team is to recognize what are some of the basics that set the teams apart. And there's been a lot of research using things like communication mapping, where you wear a little tag that kind of notes the not the content of conversation, but how many times people talk and so forth. And one thing that happens in a team that really works is that everybody talks to everybody. It's not a team in which there's a leader who talks to each member and the conversation only goes from leader to member, but there's lots of lateral conversation. And it continues frequently. There's a lot, it might be brief, but teams that really work, research shows that they get together a lot, even if it's virtually, even if it's long distance, but people stay in touch. When there is a meeting and there is a leader and the leader's there, the communication mapping shows that what you look for if you're sort of observing a team is that the leader listens more than speaks. If you have a team where everybody gets together and the leader drones on for half an hour and then asks for 1-minute reports, not knowing the content, I'd still bet that team is not going to be as successful as it could be. But when people interact, that's when collaboration can happen. That's when innovation happens, when different people exchange ideas. And it's not just that you don't want the leader to be talking all the time. In good teams, there's a sort of discipline and a self-discipline so that everybody has a chance to speak up, even though some members may be more senior and skilled than others. Part of the strength of a team is the collaboration that comes among different viewpoints and skill sets. So strong teams allow people to all talk. And one way that if you're not the leader, you can help lead the team is to model that kind of conversation. You can ask what so-and-so thinks if so-and-so hasn't spoken up much. And you can also set rules that you agree to live by. Good teams do have some rules. They may be acknowledged or not, but things like timeliness. If you're going to meet, are we all going to be on time, or is it okay not to be on time? You can take a lot of stress out of team relationship if you actually acknowledge these are going to be our operating principles and this is what we're going to live by. And if you want to change the rules, you do it explicitly. So one thing you can do is help take some of the mystery out of team membership by giving a team a little bit of structure. Another thing that's critical to leading a team is for everybody to know what's the point. Why are we there? Why are we at this meeting? What is our big charge? And from wherever you sit in the room on a team, by asking helpful questions, whether they're helpful because they help somebody else articulate what they're saying, or they're helpful because they're bringing out points that are useful to everybody, you can help be a team leader. And in great teams, leadership does tend to be dispersed. People fill in for one another. People are not too uptight about particular roles. Status doesn't matter. Those are all characteristics that you can promote from wherever you're sitting.
I'm having a hard time with the next question because I'm sitting here in self-reflection about my team.
Uh-oh.
But let me. Well, as you said, it's good to be reminded, right? You think, even though you've done this a long time, it's still good to remind yourself about this stuff.
Absolutely.
I think our half hour is almost up, which I can't believe. But I wanted to ask you about another name of a chapter that seemed to follow on with having a strong team, being responsible, listening to your team, being a leader. And it says, use numbers to make your goals powerful. So I was interested in what that meant.
Well, I'm a big believer. I always have been in having the data. Whether you want to use it to brag about your achievements or to guide people to where they're going. So if you're if you're a team and you are thinking about what you're going to do this year, even if you don't know what you're doing, if you decide you're going to have 5 projects and you're going to put them on a calendar and you're going to reduce things to some kind of project management form, which always involves having numbers and keeping track of numbers instead of knowing where you are, it takes a lot of the arguments away. If you're trying to make a case about your productivity to a potential customer and you say, I did 23 of these last year, that's much better than saying, oh, I did a whole lot of these, I'm really good at them. Numbers are, if you do them simply and specifically and accurately, they can be a really clear way of pointing out your achievements, but they also can show where there's a gap between your goal and where you are today, and you don't have to fight about are we making progress or not if you can find a way to talk about it in numbers. So looking for the data, even if it's just in managing your own desktop, can be a good habit.
And then lastly, tell me about choose to be an optimist.
Well, this is one which was a very personal chapter to me because I think I'm a born pessimist. When I was in law school, like I was in college, I would say you're going to flunk if you don't study. You can't go out and party. And when I was first in a law firm, I felt like I had to, as an early woman, I was never going to get make any progress if I didn't stick at my desk. And I told myself all these negative things. And finally I realized that had some utility, when I was in high school and I needed to study. But that voice in my head that I had developed to keep me working wasn't really very accurate. All these worries, all these thinking I would fail, maybe that would help me write a tight contract. But if I wanted to get somewhere, if I wanted to do something, I had to start talking to myself the way I would if I was trying to encourage a good friend. And I would need to focus on this is what is possible. Yes, that's a problem, but this is how we get past it. I had to start talking to myself as though I were encouraging another person. And so I started doing that years ago, and since then there's been lots of research into cognitive therapy and things like that. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not an expert in those things, but basically what I found is this kind of thing I was doing in my own head, now it's a pretty mainstream practice, and there are lots of skills you can use to shift your attitude from one of pessimism, which can set you back, to one of optimism that can keep you going.
That's just great advice. I want to just say again, the book by Beverly Jones is Think Like an Entrepreneur, Act Like a CEO. And Bev, can you tell us where we might find this book?
Well, it's available from Amazon and Barnes and Noble and all kinds of. If you go to any bookstore, if they don't have it, they can order it, and it's even popped up in gift stores and other places. But Amazon or Barnes and Noble is a good starting point if you want to give it to somebody for Christmas.
Exactly. Thank you. So thanks for spending this half hour with us, Bev. Thank you for writing this book. As I told you when I was through this conversation, I was thinking about how I work, and some of the tips that you shared were really, really helpful, and I know they'll be helpful to other members of our audience. So thanks again for joining us.
Well, thanks for inviting me. It was fun, and it was great to touch base with you.